The views and opinions expressed during Eye on the Triangle do not represent WKNC or NC State student media. Your dial is currently tuned to Eye on the Triangle on WKNC 88.1 FM HD1. Thanks for listening. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your day. My name is Emilia Rivadeneira, host of Eye on the Triangle, and with further ado, let's get into some news. After suspending fares during the COVID-19 pandemic, Go Triangle has returned collecting fares on July 1st, 2024. Go Rally will also return charging for trips on August 1st, 2024. According to the News and Observer, Go Triangle has announced that users who download and create an account on the UMO Mobility app will be eligible for free rides during July. People aged 13 to 18 and over 65 may also travel for free on Go Triangle and Go Rally by enrolling in one of UMO's Go Pass programs. Go Triangle will charge $2.50 for rides, and Go Rally trips will cost $1.25. Passengers can either pay in cash with exact change, buy digital tickets or a Go Pass on the free UMO app, or acquire a physical Go Pass UMO card at the Pass sales office at the Go Triangle Regional Transit Center in Durham. Go Durham, Chapel Hill Transit, and Go Cary will remain fare-free in the Triangle. As for the NC State community, according to NC State's transportation website, NC State's faculty, staff, and students can request a free Go Pass to ride the Go Triangle buses. For more information, visit transportation.ncsu.edu. The Amazon series The Summer I Turned Pretty has taken over UNC's campus and parts of downtown Chapel Hill to shoot its forthcoming season. According to the News and Observer, UNC will become Finch College, the fictional college of the series. On Monday, July 8, 2024, several people were seen on East Franklin Street hoping to meet actors Christopher Briney and Lola Tung, who play Conrad Fisher and Isabel Belly Conkling. Filming will continue today. Cameron Avenue, the main road through UNC's campus, will be closed between Columbia and Raleigh Streets from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. Finally, according to the Daily Tar Heel, England's Manchester City and Scotland's Celtic football teams will meet at UNC's Kennan Stadium on July 23, 2024 at 7 p.m. The game is part of the 2024 FC series, which consists of friendly matches designed to warm up and prepare players for the professional season. Tickets vary from $65 to $400. A part of the revenues will be given to the UNC Children's Hospital. The town of Carrboro will finance a trolley service that will carry tourists between downtown Carrboro and Chapel Hill, connecting shops, restaurants, and bars. The football match is predicted to be beneficial for businesses around the area, as the summer months are slower, thanks in part to a smaller student population. Chapel Hill is no stranger to hosting football matches, as last year it hosted a game between Chelsea Football Club and Wrexham Association Football Club that drew more than 50,500 people and generated over $15 million in revenue for Chapel Hill and surrounding regions. Members of the community are hoping that this year's game will have an impact like last year's match. Well, those were the weekly news curated by yours truly. Coming up next, get ready for an exclusive interview with a special guest, diving deep into an important topic for our community, especially during the summer days. Stay tuned as we uncover insights, explore solutions, and ignite a conversation that's as hot as the weather itself. Hello and welcome to WKNC's Eye on the Triangle, your source of local news, where we dive deep into the pressing issues affecting our communities. I'm your host, Emilia Rivadeneira, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Dr. Ashley Ward, Director of the Heat Policy Innovation Hub at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Ward. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. Well, today we'll be delving into a topic that's on everyone's minds right now, the blistering heat wave sweeping across the southeast regions, more specifically in the Triangle area in North Carolina. Besides it being summer, why is it so exceptionally hot outside right now?
Well, one of the things that has been happening this summer, and you may have heard the term, heat dome, basically. And that occurs when in the upper atmosphere, you have a pressure system that acts sort of like a lid on a pot. And so it holds all of the heat below it, right? And so it keeps it very stagnant. And so we've had a few of those move through already this heat season. One of the things about a heat dome, though, is just like a lid on the pot, the longer the lid is there, the hotter it gets underneath it, right? So, in some of those cases, which you may remember from last summer, where we had in Arizona, for example, 30 days of over 110 degrees, which is really exceptional, right? So I think, we certainly have had those kinds of phenomena happening through this heat season. But ultimately, what I think we're seeing is a resetting of a new normal. And, one of the things we talk about with climate change is how the temperature regime will change over time. We've talked about this with example for rainfall too, like changes in precipitation, where we're not getting slow, steady rainfall. Rainfall is coming in really big, downpours or deluge, right? And it's the same thing happening with temperature. So, the last 12 months, each month has hit the record warmth for that month. So, May was the warmest May on record, April, the warmest April on record, and so on and so forth. So, what we're really seeing here is a phenomena of our changing climate. And that means that our heat seasons are getting more intense and they're also getting longer. So they're traditionally considered May through September, but now we're seeing starting like in April and maybe going through to October. So what we are feeling right now is really the result of climate change.
Right. And I actually wanted to mention that Raleigh reached a staggering all time record high, I think, on Saturday of 106 degrees Fahrenheit with a maximum heat index of 118 Fahrenheit. These temperatures are kind of rare for the Triangle area where we usually don't see highs touching triple digits frequently. You mentioned climate change. But what are some of the other factors that have contributed to this extreme and unusual heat wave hitting our area?
So, some things that magnify what's already happening in the environment. So, we're already experiencing increasing temperatures, baseline temperatures due to climate change. And then we have those phenomena like those heat bombs that come through. But if you live in an urban area, you also are experiencing the impact of the urban heat island. And what that means is that the materials that we use in our urban environment, asphalt, cement, different materials that we use in buildings and things like that, are heat trapping materials. And so as the solar radiation and the temperature warms up outside, those materials capture that temperature, increasing the temperature as you're close to the ground, right? So as humans are walking on asphalt and cement, the radiated heat coming is not just coming from the sky, from the sun anymore, right? It's also radiating up from the ground and from all of the surfaces around us. One thing that's really important to note about climate change, and this is important with the urban heat island effect, is one of the most difficult and actually dangerous aspects of heat is persistently high overnight temperatures. Now, you cited that really incredible record temperature of 106 degrees at the RDU, and that's true. One of the things that we know from climate change is east of the Mississippi, so certainly throughout the Southeast and North Carolina for sure, is that in the coming decades, we will see increasing numbers of nights where the overnight temperature remains above 75 degrees, and in some cases, 80 degrees. In those circumstances, this is very dangerous because the everything needs a moment to recover from heat, right? Our human bodies do, plants, animals, our energy grid and those systems, everything needs time that overnight. It turns out those hours overnight really are critical in helping, everything rebound from that extreme exposure during the day. If you live in an urban area, though, and the urban area has been absorbing the surfaces that heat all day long, it also contributes, though, to that overnight temperature. So when the sun goes down at night, all of that heat is released from those materials in the urban setting and keeps the environment in an urban setting warm. So there are lots of different factors that contribute to heat vulnerability. For those that live in urban areas, though, they are particularly vulnerable to the urban heat island. Now, I want to point out that in North Carolina and in many places, rural communities have higher heat illness rates than urban communities. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. For example, energy poverty and inefficient housing. And so, if you can imagine those nights where it remains very warm overnight and you live in a home in which you either don't have air conditioning, your air conditioning unit is old, maybe, and not as efficient, or you can't afford to run your air conditioner. Now you're in a home where you can't have access to cooling overnight to cool down. And so those overnight temperatures become really important in our body's ability to recover from what we were exposed to during the day.
Right. And I've heard actually about the term heat island, and I know that Raleigh is considered one of those, but I wanted to ask you, what does this mean for us? What implications does this heat wave have for communities? I know that you touch on a little bit about that, but just in depth.
One of the things I hope is that people start to realize that heat impacts almost every aspect of our lives. Certainly, there are health implications for heat. So, if you have an underlying health condition like diabetes or a respiratory condition or cardiovascular disease, you are more vulnerable to the impacts of extreme heat. But what most people don't know is even if you take common medications like anxiety medications or antidepressant medication, medications for hypertension. These medications interrupt your body's ability to thermoregulate. So they actually make it harder for you to cool your body down when you've been exposed to heat. So then we have vulnerable groups such as those who are, aged populations over 65, but pregnant women. And so I like to say everybody is vulnerable to heat. And I think it's a misperception that people think they're not. There are some people that are more vulnerable than others. And so certainly the human health aspect of heat, we know that there is growing connection between mental health, specifically schizophrenia and heat. We also know that heat interacts poorly with opioid use and alcohol use. So that all of these things lead to more severe negative health outcomes. But heat also affects our lives in other ways. It is an economic burden on our communities, especially if you think about those who have to run their air conditioning constantly to cool off. And I was just talking about the issue of energy poverty. Heat interrupts and decreases learning outcomes for children. So when we're talking about it getting hotter in May and at the beginning of June or September, when children are back in school, most people do not realize that about 40% of the public schools in the US lack adequate HVAC. So they are not adequately cooled. And most people think, oh, that's got to be like in Vermont or somewhere where it doesn't matter. That's not true. We have schools in North Carolina that are not air conditioned. We have prisons in North Carolina that are not air conditioned. There is no cooling standard in the U.S., so nursing homes for our age populations, we have a state rule that says they can't get above 80 degrees. 80 degrees is actually quite hot for people who already have underlying health conditions. And then affordable housing and public housing, there is no cooling standard. So often those living arrangements lack AC. So that leads to, a lack of or a decrease in learning outcomes, the stress on populations and families, things like just trying to cool and maintain safe temperatures for your food in your home. I mean, I think people really do not think about the broader implications of heat. Those are all individual things, but systematically, we have the pull on our electric grid. How hard is it to provide that service to people? The impact of warming temperatures on our water systems, where we have an overgrowth of algae when the water gets too warm in our freshwater systems. And so, if you like to go and go to the lake and have different recreation, harmful algal blooms are a part of this process. Our livestock and our animals are impacted, which also decreases agricultural yields. I mean, I can go on, right? The list goes on and on. The impact that this is the environment in which that we live, and we have built our entire civilization around a certain temperature regime. Our bodies have adapted, our ecosystems have adapted to this, and we're just not ready and able to adapt fast enough for how quickly the temperatures are changing.
Right. And I really like what you mentioned that, like heat and well now extreme heat affects everyone, affects older generations. It affects us students and in our daily lives and the environment that we interact in. And so I wanted to ask you about what are some recommendations that we can follow in order to prevent um, all of this, experiencing all of these risks.
I love that you asked me that question because so many times people just ask about the problem and not what to do about it. And I think it's really important that people know that there are some really practical steps you can take to protect yourself. One of the most important things you can do is check on each other. I think that's really important. The number one factor in resilience, writ large, whether it's from a hurricane, tornadoes, heat, or anything else, is social capital. The relationships we have with other people is what actually makes us resilient. So check on each other. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is there's some very, very simple steps that an individual could take to protect themselves individually. If you go for a walk or a hike, or you play a game, a basketball game with friends, or you do anything where you're exposed to heat and you come home, one of the first things you can do is take a cool shower for about 10 minutes. That doesn't cost anything really, right? And it really lowers your core body temperature. It's very effective at doing so. You can also, there are also other methods that have been that science has proven, research has proven that work at lowering our core body temperature. For example, if you immerse your feet over your ankles in cool water, this works great for people who are disabled or our age populations who can't really get in the shower. So if you take a bucket and put their feet in cool water over their ankles, it lowers your core body temperature. One of the things that the military uses in the same vein is they don't want trainees taking off their boots, in the middle of training exercises. So they do what's called arm immersion. And so they have troughs where they immerse their arms from their hands all the way over their elbows in cool water. This is something that could easily be transferred to an occupational setting, like people who work in roofing or construction or road workers or a number of other applications where, every hour you just drop your arms in the cool water, a cooler. You could take a rectangular cooler and set it up as a cooling station and do this. Very easy to do. But immersing your arms or your feet for 5 to 7 minutes, extremely effective. On the same vein, if you have a t-shirt and you're outside, if you dip your t-shirt in cool water and put it on your body and restore that every hour, it keeps your core body temperature low. These are all life-saving things that you can do in the immediate. A little bit more planning is in your home or apartment or wherever you live, strategic use of fans, making sure that during the day when it's really hot, that you're keeping those windows and everything closed. I know that seems counterintuitive, but you want to keep the heat out. As it cools down, open them, turn your fans on, take a cool rag and wipe your body off and stand in front of the fan. And then finally, for a lot of people who have window unit air conditioning units, if you're having to ration your cooling in your home for cost, prioritize cooling your bedroom because this is where you're going to sleep. And we really need that recovery period. It's very, very important for health outcomes. A lot of people think about cooling their den, their living space, but you're not actually in that living space that long. So if you cool your bedroom and keep your bedroom door shut, you can really have you'll have a basically a cooling center set up in your own home. And speaking of cooling centers, since you're in Raleigh, the Wake County government does establish cooling centers. And so there are formal cooling centers that you can go visit. But I would also encourage people to think about informal cooling centers. You know, places like Walmart or a shopping center where you can go and just walk around for an hour and cool down, even the grocery store. And so, really walk slowly through the grocery store when you go, right? And give yourself time to get the benefit of that air conditioning. The public libraries are often used for cooling centers. One of the challenges is that they close, at 6 or 7. So that's been a difficult, thing for people to try and utilize. But I do know that the city of Raleigh and other municipalities and governments across North Carolina. I know this because I've been working with many of their governments. They're actively looking for creative ways to establish cooling centers for communities to use.
Yeah, I've actually had done use of Dutch cooling centers. I usually just go walk in a grocery store because it's really hot during the summer. Um,
Mhm.
but talking more about the impacts associated with extreme heat in our environment, I actually found out this news story that said that as of July 4th, 75% of the state is under a moderate drought, and the long-term outlook is seen as optimistic, with predictions suggesting this could persist through September. So, how much of a role does the heat wave we're currently experiencing play in exacerbating this drought conditions?
What a great question. So I usually say that heat is the least lonely event. I say that meaning that it often exacerbates other underlying conditions, like some of the ones I was already talking about earlier, but it also is an amplifier when it comes to other climate events. So, what I mean by that is drought is a great example. The hotter the air temperature is, the more evaporation that takes place out of the soil, and the rate of evaporation from plants and soil increases, which dries out the soil, which leads to drought. And so it also means that when we have rainfall, it's evaporating quickly and it doesn't have enough time to seep deep into our groundwater systems. So heat and drought are very intimately connected, of course. And I think one of the things that is also very concerning in these situations is, especially as we lead to the fall, as you rightly noted, that they're predicting that this could lead well into the fall, is whenever you have a lot of dried plant matter, you create fuel for forest fires. And I don't know if you remember from, I believe it was 2016, 17 area, we had a fairly large set of wildfires that took place in western North Carolina and through eastern Tennessee, Gatlinburg and that area, also Lake Lure area, North Carolina over. These were devastating, enormous wildfires that were fueled by prolonged drought after periods of high heat, right? So we are creating the litter that is needed basically for wildfire. So this is an example of how climate events start to cascade into multiple disasters. So it's an extreme heat event that increases the drought event, that increases the likelihood of a wildfire event. And so on that same note, though, we are in North Carolina. It is very common in the summer to have a thunderstorm blow through, in the afternoon and quite severe sometimes. And so one of the things that commonly happens in those circumstances is we have power outages due to those. Now, if you live in an urban area, that restoration can be fairly rapid, so you get your power turned back on relatively quickly, not always, but relatively quickly. Outside of the urban areas, those power restoration rates are a bit longer. So something that would have been just a nuisance event during the summer, a severe thunderstorm, in the middle of heat season where it knocks out people's air conditioner, you take a nuisance event and it becomes quite a dangerous event in certain circumstances, especially as we think about 24 hours, 48 hours without power. And so, again, to my point that heat is the least lonely event, it often accompanies or coincides with other events to magnify the impact of those events as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it is kind of worrisome to hear the connection that the extreme heat has with droughts and potential consequences with wildfires and all. And I wanted to ask you about what does this indicate about the broader trends in climate change affecting communities in the southeast, especially in the Triangle area, Raleigh, Durham, and North Carolina in general as well.
Well, the last National Climate Assessment showed that the Southeast is a region that will likely experience some of the largest impacts from climate change in the country, as measured by percent GDP, mortality, and other factors. This is largely due to the combination of multiple different types of hazards that exist in this region of the Southeast. At the same time, let's see, a few years ago, Johns Hopkins released a study that also showed that not only is the Southeast one of the most or likely to experience some of the largest impacts from climate change, but they are also the region is the least ready to deal with those. And so I think one of the things that I know I want to take a moment to really praise Governor Cooper in this sense for heat because he has done quite a few things that have made it a little bit easier for North Carolinians to address this topic. Um, for one, establishing an Office of Recovery and Resilience. We had the first chief resilience officer, I think, in the nation, and there's still only about 13 states that have them. Amanda Martin is our current one. And so situating a resilience office with emergency management and the governor's office has been really critical to helping North Carolinians recover, both mitigate the impacts of these events and build resilience to these events. But also working with our partners at the Office of Recovery and Resilience, my shop here at Duke, along with the State Climate Office and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, we have developed county level heat action plans for every county in the state. And so there is a heat action plan template that is available on the NCORE Office of Recovery and Resilience website that will help community leaders walk through the process of how to identify who is vulnerable in their community to heat and how, and develop the necessary structures to both plan adequately in advance, but then also respond in the moment of extreme heat events. planning, heat action planning is really, really critical part of this for communities because you said you have visited a cooling center before, but many people, when surveyed, have no idea that there's a cooling center available to them, or they don't have transportation to get there, right? Or and so thinking through all of the different ways in which people can protect themselves is an important part of that planning process. Um, and it also means that when local governments need to allocate resources to do things like open up shelters for our unhoused populations, for example, or housing unstable populations, this is something that has to be planned for. And it's not something that's easy to do at the last minute, right? So, working through the planning process to help all of our community partners come together, whether you're an ag extension person that's going to talk to farmers about how to protect outdoor workers, occupational health nurses that are working with manufacturers, people who supervise county workers that work on our roads and on our campuses and in our public facilities, to those that serve like Meals on Wheels and food pantries and the services for the unhoused, drug addicted populations, all of those. I mean, so it takes a community of people to address this, and in order to do that, it takes intentional planning. And so the state of North Carolina has done a really great job of trying to build the support that's necessary to help local governments do it. Now, in other parts of the region of the Southeast, Miami has a heat officer. Jane Gilbert is the heat officer. She was the first heat officer in the country and the first woman. We only have three heat officers: Miami, Phoenix, and LA right now. And then there's Arizona just appointed their very first statewide heat officer. I would love to see North Carolina do something like this. I strongly believe in a whole of state approach to this problem because um, while urban heat island is an issue, and the populations that someone in the city of Raleigh or Durham would need to deal with is very different than the kind of services and planning and preparedness that need to happen, say, in Caswell County or in some of our more rural counties, in Scotland County, Sampson County. The context is very different. The populations are different. Their capacities are different. And so thinking about a statewide heat officer, I would just be thrilled to see North Carolina, the first state in the Southeast with a heat officer, a statewide heat officer. But outside of Miami's heat officer and the work that's happening in North Carolina, I'm sad to say, states across the region that they want to, there's a desire to, and what they're looking for is guidance on what to do next. I think that we're reaching a point where heat is becoming such a big issue, hot topic, so to speak, that legislators and leaders, both at U.S. congressional level, at the state level, and at the local level, are now leaning in saying, okay, we've got to do something about this. Um, and coming together and figuring out what that looks like is something that each state has to work on.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of touching on the work that you have done and the work that the Heat Policy Innovation Hub has done, because um, from what I've read, it has been at the forefront of tackling extreme heat in North Carolina and providing resources to people. Could you give us an overview of what the hub does, and what are the projects that you're currently working on?
Sure. So the hub launched about 1 year ago, June 21st, 2023. So we're still kind of new, but the concept is not new. About 10 years ago, I was working with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I was working in Carolina communities. And they asked our team to go out and work with communities in Eastern North Carolina on climate extremes. Now, remember, this was not a period where climate change was very different back then, 10 years ago. People talked about it very differently. And so at first I was really intimidated actually to go, and I was worried, but I didn't think we were going to talk about hurricanes. I mean, other than hurricanes, I mean, and basketball, what else do we talk about in North Carolina? So barbecue, we talk about that. So, you know, but when we got there into the community members themselves, they said, actually, we know about hurricanes. But do you know anything about heat? Because we're really worried about this issue about heat. It's getting hot. And so I think to me, that was a moment where me and everybody that I worked with at the time, we were like, oh, so we started really diving into this topic of extreme heat. But it goes to show you that communities have long understood that heat is an issue for their community and something that they needed to do something to address, right? So they just been waiting for the rest of us to catch up. So this is something that communities have recognized a long time ago. Um, Now, researchers over the last 10 years, they've actually done a really good job too. Both, UNC, NC State, Central, I mean, A&T, you name them, all of the ones in North Carolina, including Duke, have done some really great work at trying to understand exactly how heat impacts the body, at what thresholds, how can we quantify the impact of heat. Really great research on this topic. However, none of that was making its way into the policy and decision-making space. As I've been working for the last 6 years at Duke, what the insights that communities have about this problem, the lessons that science can give us about this problem, none of those things seem to be part of the conversation whenever I was talking with policy and decision makers. So I proposed the Heat Policy Innovation Hub to do exactly that, right? To be the bridge between community, science, and policy. And so, one of our big goals is to foster sort of cross sector collaboration on the topic of heat. And we just finished and wrapped up a big event called HeatWise as part of a longer, bigger program that we have, a policy partnership program, if you will, where we had 100 leaders from throughout the country come here to Duke for 2.5 days, and really deep dive on some topics around heat. We had folks from the finance and insurance sector, from industry, from communities, from NGOs, from science, everybody, to really start thinking critically and deeply about some of the hardest challenges when it comes to tackling extreme heat. So a lot of what we do is foster this kind of collaborative work that comes up with sort of policy frameworks and guidelines. We work a lot with other governments to think about heat governance. So the heat action planning that we're doing some work with the UN agencies right now, helping the UN agencies develop a governance framework. We work with other states in the country as well, not just North Carolina, and through regional organizations too. So we've done a lot of work trying to help people build out what does good heat governance look like. We also partner with researchers. There may be somebody over in the School of Medicine or nursing, for example, or even engineering here on campus who are like, hey, we're doing this project on kidney stones, and we think that heat is an important driver of kidney stone development. And, how can we incorporate heat into this project? So we do research projects with folks at Duke, but in other institutions, helping them incorporate heat into their research questions so that we can better understand how heat affects other health outcomes. And then I think, one of the things that we're really committed to at the Heat Hub is leaning in on this challenge with rural heat vulnerability. In rural communities throughout North Carolina, the heat-related illness rates are 7 to 10 times what they are in urban areas. And the solutions that we have, like cool pavement and cool roofs and tree planting and things that are meant to mitigate the impact of the urban heat island, aren't as easily transferable to a rural setting. Cooling centers are not going to work in a rural setting where you have to drive 30 miles to get to one. So we've really been thinking deeply about rural resilience at the Heat Hub and figuring out how we can help prepare rural communities, but also build the capacity in rural communities to deal with this issue.
That actually sounds amazing, like amazing work. And looking ahead to the fall and to the rest of the year, talking more about the solutions rather than, like the issue itself. What can we expect to see from the hub to do regarding, extreme heat, as you mentioned, especially now that we have actually started to realize about the extreme heat now that during the summer it has hit, you know, the
Mhm.
highest temperatures in history, I think. in the Triangle area. So,
So, from our HeatWise event, we're developing a report that will be published toward the end of the year that sort of captures the key findings. But also from that group, we're putting together some work groups of people to take a even deeper dive into some of these issues, and particularly thinking about um, what kind of recommendations we can make, for example, to those that hold and manage grant dollars and how we can get those funds from, we had the IRA and the IIJA and huge amounts of money coming out of the federal government to help communities build resilience to climate change. And very small amount of that money has been directed toward heat mitigation efforts and adaptation resilience for heat. And so one of the things we're working on this fall is thinking about how can we open up right? That pathway to make sure that the communities that need the funds to do the projects that they would like to do, what are things that can happen that can make access to those funds easier for community partners. We've also got I'm very excited about a project we were recently funded to do, and we're going to be working on that this year. And this sounds like a wonky project, but I promise it's a really cool project. Energy poverty is a big deal for people. So we are working with a set of partners from both from the energy sector and the insurance sector and communities up and down the I-95 corridor, looking at the role that insurance can play and helping reduce the impact of energy poverty. So, for example, um, is there an insurance product that would make it so that people don't have to worry about their air conditioning getting shut off so they could run their air conditioning during heat months that would insure them against this risk, right? So we're doing some work with the private sector on things like that. And of course, we also have some of our other research projects that we will continue working on with our colleagues throughout the university and other universities too, in addition to refining some of the governance policies, like making sure that we understand at which temperature thresholds do we need to use to enact our warning systems. Right now, although the Raleigh Weather Service office is wonderful, they do a great job at issuing warnings and alerts for extreme heat. Um, but that's not uniform across the National Weather Service. So one of the things that we're trying to do is think a lot about at which threshold people need to act. And that means which threshold do we see people go to the emergency department, right? So, like, we want to make sure that the watches and warnings that are issued before we hit those temperatures so that people know to take caution and maybe it will keep them out of the ER.
right, for sure. And yeah, I think what you're working on, it's exceptional. I think I'm personally excited to see the work that the Innovation Hub is doing and will continue to do in the future. But is there anything else you would like to add?
I think I would just emphasize to anybody listening what I said earlier, which is everybody is vulnerable to heat. And the heat that you're experiencing right now is not the same as the heat that you experienced 10 years ago. It's higher in temperature, it's longer in duration, it's more humid, it doesn't get cooler at night. And all of these things mean that even if 10 years ago you used to go jogging, every evening, every day at 4 o'clock and you were fine, it doesn't mean that that's going to be okay for right now. And so the misperception of risk around heat is one of, to me, the biggest challenges that we face, and why it's so great that programs like this one and others are talking about this topic so that people start to be aware. Young people die from heat stroke every year. You can be 25 and in great shape and still have a heat stroke. And so, my biggest takeaway is to never take for granted that you don't think that you fall into a risk group, right? Everybody is a risk group. If you're exposed to heat, you're at risk for heat
Yeah.
illness. Yeah.
No, yeah, for sure. And especially now, during the summer with these high temperatures that we're seeing. But yeah, anyway, so this has been a very insightful interview. Thank you so much, Dr. Ward, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And on that note, thank you for tuning in to WKNC's Eye on the Triangle, your source of local news, interviews, and more. For those eager to dive deeper into the projects and valuable resources offered by the Heat Policy Innovation Hub, visit nicholasinstitute.duke.edu. As well, you can listen back to this episode or past episodes on wknc.org/podcasts. Music for this episode is titled Krakatoa by Noah Stark, licensed under Creative Commons. Thank you once again, Dr. Ward, for accompanying us today, and don't forget to stay hydrated throughout the summer.